So Ryan, currently at Washington State University, is an instructor of integrated strategic communications, including web design and usability. He has held multiple leadership roles in strategic communications in the Seattle area. At the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Richland, Ryan is the team lead for institutional communications and science and technology conferences. And so, speaking of technology, I will now hand it over to Ryan Resume to talk about making websites usable. Ryan, over to you, sir.
Thanks for the intro. And it's really good to see so many joining in from abroad and local. I'm excited about the topic. It's what I love teaching and among other topics, but also a shout out to everyone at WSU, the PRSSA chapter there. It's great to have you join us as well. And you should recognize the picture. It's Bryan Hall there, the clock tower building at WSU. And I taught full time in person, but now I teach in addition to working at P&L as the intro provided. So I'm really excited. Let's dive in. I've got a lot of good stuff I hope that you'll see, and I'm open to all the questions that you might have, knowing that I'm not the expert, but I do like to share what I can. You might be asking, well, all right, what are we talking about with usability, and how are we actually evaluating that with a website or an application, a web app, a phone app, or any other kind of interface, really. This goes into other spaces in the business domain where a user and an interface of some system or program needs to work together. And so I like to always tell people the gist of the course that I teach is this point right here. You've built an interface. Now, are people using it the right way? And how do you know that? Is it really serving them the right way? And so I'll just say that, it's a technique basically to evaluate a product or a system and that interface and really identify any concerns that are along the way with the user journey through that experience. And if so, how do you streamline and how do you know what to streamline specifically so it becomes a better experience for them? And the way that this is being done, there are actually more ways now than there were before, but what I'll be kind of introducing to you are the basics. And the basic approach is a qualitative kind of approach rather than quantitative data. So quantitative would be user groups or large focus groups that go through an experience and you log lots of data in large numbers so that you can actually have quantifiable numbers. What we're looking to do with usability tests typically is a qualitative approach where you'd sit down as a facilitator of discussion and guiding someone through an experience and let that participant go through that experience. You would record their experience, and that's why you see on the screen here a few different laptops that are involved, right? What is the participant working from, and what is the facilitator working from in guiding that person through, plus an external monitor that's featuring what is that person experiencing, and that's typically what's being recorded. There are other ways to do this as well. And I like the fact that now we have web technology so that you can more effectively, more efficiently sometimes not have to sit down next to someone and do this, although that personable approach is really good because you can read body language or you can read what they're going through and maybe make extra notes. But for the most part, through Zoom, through Teams, whatever, with the recording feature, you can have this kind of experience that we're having. But just imagine that that person that's being taken through the experience is letting their screen be recorded as part of the journey that they're taking. And there you go. You've captured all that you really need to along with their experience. So the experience typically is to take them into the interface, the web app, whatever, take them through a few key steps that are needed to see how well they're doing with that, record the data, and then analyze it and figure out what you do with that information. So that's the basics. There are many more variations on that, many more variations that you can go down and to discover specific areas of interest. But for the sake of this discussion, I just wanted to at least give you an intro to what that looks like. And so a usability test is pretty much this kind of three-part look where you have the setup, that's the top row there, where you're planning, well, what are we supposed to be testing for now? And you prepare prompts or ideas about how you would get that user to go through that experience without without creating bias or leading them in too far, but letting them take the journey themselves. You figure out what the setup of recording should be, and then how are we going to get the participants that are the right ones. The middle row talks about the actual conducting of the usability test, where you'd begin with the basic steps of introducing them into the experience, and then you take them to the homepage or the starting point of the experience. You give them specific tasks, and that phrase in parentheses about "please think out loud for me" is good, because they can talk through what they're going through rather than just keep it in their head, and that gives you even more data, more input. It's really useful. And then you would finish that experience with some follow-up questions just to see, did this, what more can we get of useful information, and how can they rate that experience back to us in good ways. And then the third stage is just evaluating and looking through the data and seeing what kind of adjustments and go forward. And you'll see as I go through this with you, I'll give you a few examples of how this usability test experience has gone, and how that iterative work keeps going from here. Okay. And let me just kind of take you into, well, a little bit of the technicalities. What do you need to set up for if you're going to do something like this? Or if you hire a firm that would do this for you, what are the systems that they might be employing to use this, to go through a usability test? Honestly, you probably have some data already through Google Analytics that you could look at. It's not a usability test per se, but it is useful information, because you start to understand where are people spending most of the time, how much time on a web page or that part of their experience, what are the next clicks that they get to from there, what's their path that they're taking, and see if they're really activating on the calls to action or the things that you have in mind for them to do. So already you might have something to look at. There are other technologies out there, though, recording technologies, using a webcam or using an actual screen capture, video capture device. Look Back is one that's fairly new, and it's pretty intriguing, honestly, because those little screenshots don't do it justice. But you can see that they are actually conducting a live session with prompts, and they're recording the user's activity, not just scrolling, but it would activate an indication of where on the screen the person has pushed to activate an action, right? The thumb clicker has a resolution of sorts to show that click. And there's some other technologies that are looking more like this kind of enhancement from a Zoom experience or a Teams experience into really, this is an interface built for doing a lot. And it includes things like heat maps, like what you can see on the right with Crazy Egg. Maze has a little bit of that as well. Maze has a little more of a kind of thorough experience with a little bit of prompts, and then showing some of the results already and interpreting some of that for you. So it actually gets a leg up from just kind of relying on your own intuition and knowledge from what you're seeing and experiencing with the users. So pretty cool technology to explore. I'm not going to go into that because that is a little more advanced than what we're talking about here. I think it helps to know the basics first. Another interesting tool that's come to bear, of course, is artificial intelligence. And there are ways that we could look at, where does that plug in? How does this help what has typically been a face-to-face experience? How can something else get us further down the path? And so you can imagine with ChatGPT that you can plug in content, let's say, draft content that you have in mind for the website, or go through an A/B test kind of a effort where there's one variation on what the experience could look like and another variation, and see what those prompts from ChatGPT can interpret out of that for you, and more effectively or efficiently get some insights. There's also the ability to plug in an entire website as is and get a report out of how does it perform, how is its design. You can look at those kinds of things. There are applications as well that use AI, even in the design state. So like Wix.com or those basic tools that some are probably saying, well, that's more basic for me. I'd rather commission an entire build for myself. That's fine, but just know that Wix.com does have AI built into it a little bit, so it can understand what the nature of the business is and where you're going, and make recommendations of the design to try to enhance that. There are some tricky points to that, though. The downsides being, honestly, with web design, there's a limit to the imagination that AI can provide there, and a limitation on how do they really understand your client and your needs with them. So if you're doing this for your business, or if you're doing this to connect with partners and exchange business critical information, how effective in its reference point is AI to give you the kind of insights that you're looking for, right? So there's some downsides. And also they don't understand necessarily it doesn't understand the human behavior aspects that maybe you're very familiar with in your business, and how a user more likely is to behave right now, because the system or the AI system hasn't learned enough about that to inform you about that. But from a content speed and generation and iteration, it's actually kind of, worth looking into. Okay, enough of that. I'm not really going to explore much of that either, because again, the basics. And so this is where I'd turn to what I teach at WSU, Washington State University, with the COM 490 class. It is a class that's reserved for mostly juniors and seniors, but it enables anyone from a content background, marketing background, digital design and technology kind of background, or looking to enhance their experience. Where can I go with this? What kind of career is out there with these kinds of skills? And get a little practice with that. And I like to connect my students with real business opportunity. And so they're actually not just practicing theory, but they're actually trying to apply it into the real world space. So getting business clients and websites that they can test for as part of the course is pretty key. So what would I take them through? It's going to be what you'll see here in my checklist. And so I repurposed the basic course for your sake. First things first, you got to figure out what are the logistics to get a test like this set up, and what are we going to try to test for? What are the key actions that we're looking into? And if it's designed right for that, who are we testing? Because there could be a few different audiences. So who is exactly the user persona for this test? And yes, you could make iterations of that depending on who you'd need to test for in addition to that one audience, but try to keep your test to just one audience so that you don't construe your data too much. So what's that one user experience? What's that one user profile that we're kind of targeting on our answers here? So what are those key actions and key tasks that I need to ask them to go through? What would the questions and prompts be? I'll give you some examples of that to help you along the way. What technically is my equipment to make this happen, and how do I invite people in and get them involved with me in this? And then when it comes to actually producing the results and looking at those results and kind of packaging together informative, good data that decision makers with you can look at and understand, where did you go with your study and how does that inform where we need to go as a business or with this interface. The standard products would probably be something like, let's look at the entire spreadsheet. I use a spreadsheet with those questions and answers. I want to find out exactly, as every user that I tested went through the experience, how was each user's experience a little different, or their responses or their time to accomplish the task, how did each vary? So using a spreadsheet is really nice because you have the prompts followed by each person's run through that. And then a sitemap, which I'll explain to you here today, gives you a good lay of the land of the entire experience. What are the pages involved, and how does that site, how is it organized to facilitate the work? User flow diagram, I'll explain that as well. You'll see an example. Wireframes too, because those are the low fidelity way of designing, or at least looking into the design, and then how would you iterate that? So typically I'd ask my students to design, what does a wireframe look like now with the site that you're exploring and reviewing, followed by, after you've been informed by the results, what tweaks would you design into that? And a wireframe helps you to do that pretty effectively. And then the findings is your big executive summary or findings along the way with quotes and using phrases that the users actually share with you that it was part of their experience. And it's worth noting because it's in their words what their experience was like. That would be the checklist, right? So you got some logistical things, the first setup, and then you've got, what are my outputs so that I can actually package together a pretty robust look at here's what we discovered and what we think we need to do next. It's worth noting too that for textbooks, I actually use books of the trade. So Don Norman in particular, and Steve Krug with his Don't Make Me Think makes pretty good sense when you look through that book. It's an easy read with visuals, and it shows you, yeah, you're trying to save the user from mental burden, from mental struggle. You're trying to make it so efficient and so effective that it's just a natural flow and click from one thing to another as their mind is taking them through the journey with you. And then the 100 things are really good about design. We just need to know how people operate so that we can design according to that too. And there are other books there too, but I bring those in because they're very informative to the students to get them understanding the basics. Don Norman in particular is one of the pioneers, and actually he and his group coined the phrase user experience. So it's worth looking at what were they thinking from an engineering perspective and a usability at the very beginning of this use of the phrase, because our treatment of user experience may vary from what it was originally put forth to do. And Don Norman is also famous because he looks around the world around us and says, what is not usable, right? That's part of our user experience as people on Earth. And one of which, the Norman door phrase, has become synonymous with him and his practice. So if you come upon a door that does not make so much sense to you intuitively, am I supposed to push? Am I supposed to pull? It's got a handle. Should I pull it? But it says push. So you're confusing the user in that very experience, even though aesthetically it may look really nice. It still may not be as useful as it could be. And I like the reference with, the far side. So why not? So how about you? I'd like to just pause real quick from this early start about what does a usability test entail, starting to think about there are things around us that are not so usable if we pay attention to them, and just ask you what in your recent experience, just type it in the chat or help us to know what did you run into that was a stumbling block over the last couple of weeks and you wished it was better. And I even have, one that I ran into a week ago. Local to the Tri-Cities, I have in Washington State is a local drama group about to perform the show Newsies. And my struggle was as I tried to get in and book some tickets to that for my family, my user, I had an issue with my username, or should I go as a guest? Because when I tried to go in as a user that has my account, I was getting a fail all the time, a password conflict. I tried to reset it and it still wouldn't accept my reset of the password. I'm sure that's not new to any of you. You've seen those things before. It just happened, right, within this last week for me, another usability struggle, and I could not fix it myself, even though I tried, right? Even though I went through the steps that they were asking me to reset my password. And then I switched over to guest to do a guest checkout, and that still failed. So I was left without a purchase. And you can see obviously how that would be a struggle. Let's see, I'm just looking at the chat real quick. Yeah, you don't want to feel like the nerd. You need nerd language to understand something, right? That's a different thing than it's a different language. It's a different expectation than we're coming from. Andrea, and then Janet says broken links or out of date links all the time. And there are tools so you can go through your website and actually scrape it, search it, crawl it, and test all those links for you without it hitting your back end data, just to see where are the broken links on my site. It's something as a practice we could address. And then Jessica's talking about a pop-up cookie with a button that just wouldn't work. Yeah, I know. Had to turn your phone sideways to move past it because sometimes the pop-up expands beyond the screen of your phone. I've seen that too. That's really frustrating. Yeah, for sure. And all those things that we're looking at, and Judy has another one about a link sending you to something completely unrelated. Hate that. That is not what you expected. And we'll look at some of those things too. That is a frustration point. It's funny how all of a sudden you start to explore things around you every day, and then we just kind of learn to live with it a little bit, but we're frustrated. I'll just introduce a few things too, that if we think about the basics about our life or our work with interfaces, Jacob Nielsen, who is another pioneer with Don Norman, they together combined and formed an organization, the Norman Nielsen Group. Jacob Nielsen has his famous 10 heuristics. And a heuristic is essentially what is it around you that makes it easy for you to accomplish what you need to do. And it makes it intuitive to your brain, just a natural thing for you to do. And I think of someone sitting in a cockpit of a jet, and there are so many controls I can imagine in that whole control board, joystick, everything around them, the controls with their feet, but everything is within optimal range, and they're trained to know exactly where to go so that muscle memory helps them in those scenarios. It becomes just part of what they're doing in that experience. To me, that's heuristics. That's designing according to what is natural. And so I've got a few examples just on the screen here from looking at your laptop itself. It may have an indicator that the power is on. That's helpful. And your battery is charged. That's helpful. Or there's lately with Teams and Zoom, if you're in an office environment, there's a little glow button that you can put up on top of your cubicle or something just to indicate, or outside your door to indicate your status. If you are, so someone that walks by doesn't have to guess, and they're not sitting at their desk looking at you if you're on Teams and you're in the status of being available or not. But these little light buttons have a certain code system to know if you're available or if you're on a call. It's those kinds of things that are a visibility of system status. Another example, and I'll stop looking at heuristics with you, but just another one. His fourth principle is there should be consistency in standards. And if there's not, you're breaking form with the user. You're giving them work that they don't need and guesswork. And so just a few call outs if you can see them. There's a case with product ID, product name, and category where there's a colon after category, but not with the others. On the right side, there's this edit, and then a save button that's inconsistent with the form that was structured in that list. So you're making people guess if they're doing the right thing or not. Looks like Chad's got another thought in there too, and Janet with the close buttons. Yeah, so it's hard to know if you're exactly on the right one. Website. Okay, so you got an actual Ironman website example. Yeah. It's tough because there's volunteers for that, there's sponsors for that, there's applicants to or participants. So different users have different needs. Well, in short, for this, then I'll move on. The Jacob Nielsen 10 usability heuristics look like this. And so I just picked 1 and 4 to show you it as examples, but you can imagine that number 9 is really key. I like that one. You need to help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from an error. So if they're having a bad experience, like I was with the password issue, I couldn't recover from it. I was stuck. And so I'm going to have to call them if I really want to, make the purchase. But number 5 is worth noting too. So better than just helping them recover from their errors, prevent them altogether, figure out when the errors are happening and stop it from happening. And that's where all this stuff comes into play with usability testing, because we need them to tell us sometimes what their struggle is. There is another aspect to this that's also worth noting, and that's 503C compliance. It's making sure that in some cases our websites have to be usable for visually impaired, hearing impaired, et cetera. And especially government-based sites have this requirement that you really should not be on a .gov a domain live unless you've indicated that you have or are working towards this compliance, so we're making the grade for accessibility of information like it should be. So you could explore usability from that perspective too, for the visually impaired, let's say. Do the graphics actually work for them? Does the information with alt text work for them? Okay, so the best thing to do is to start look at how is it done. And I love sharing this with my students so they get an idea. They're not going to go it alone. They're going to see some examples. In this case, what we're seeing is the facilitators on the left in black and black shirt, and the person that's got a screen in front of them, a tablet, plus you can see a camera up above looking down to record her actions as she goes through the experience. And there are some websites out there that have plenty of this. That was just off YouTube, easy to see and follow along. And one of my favorite playlists to really understand different aspects of usability and user experience is the one that the Norman Nielsen group has put together. And it's probably my favorite playlist because I can go back anytime and see a certain aspect again. Really, really easy flow. And you can jump through the videos that you like. I use them actually as part of lecture material in or homework, watching as part of the class. So let's say you're going to put together your first user experience test project. What is that going to contain? What's it going to look like? Just keep in mind, as we just saw, there is a facilitator, there's a participant, there are tasks that they're supposed to do, right? And you're recording that so that you can make reference later on. And as you think about the design, and you're not on your own with this, you shouldn't be. You should actually be tied in with others like the client manager, the project lead, the facilitator themselves, an administrative person that's helping with the invitations and validation on who's going to be in the test. So that's the project team. And then the comms team beyond your project could be that you're connecting with the web design group and you're talking to the web publishers about, if we down the road, if we make these changes, how's that going to affect publishing ability and usability on our part? Sometimes there's a governance team, at least at Microsoft when I worked there, that was very strict about making sure that iterations and rollouts to new design went through a very rigorous process. And so there's a governance team that watches over that before it rolls out. And then, on the client side too, they're going to have a business side. They're going to have those that are booking appointments and things like that. So it's trying to facilitate actions that they will use as part of their business. So how do we help their fulfillment of that? And so thinking again about what those basic UX components are going to be. Here's the list again. Remember, I'm going to show you the spreadsheet and some questions that are examples. I'm going to show you a sitemap, user flows, and how that plays into this test experience, the wireframing and what that can do, and then how we summarize all that. So the first thing to start with really is what's your information, and it's information architecture. So it's not AI, it's IA in this case. But the point is you need to think first, what am I trying to convey through this entire site? What is the collection of information, and what are the resulting actions that come from that information? How do we organize it? Sometimes companies organize by the way they are organized, by their departments or their product lines and such. And for the most part, I think that's good information and well-informed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best architecture for presenting this to a newbie, right? Someone that's newly experiencing it with you, trying to look for a solution for their trouble. And so we're going to look first at how do we map that site, and this is where the sitemap comes in. And a sitemap, really, you can use a tool like Visio at the basic level. PowerPoint can do it. I typically have my students work in tools like Glyphy, which is kind of iffy, so to speak. And there's also Lucidchart, which I really like. And sometimes we can get a whole university access to really do some robust things there. But there's even some basic free access to design. So if you really had none of that, probably PowerPoint's a decent approach. It's just like an org chart, but you're looking at from the home page to different section pages or collections of pages, and how does the entire site work together. Miro is a good one. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And then the next thing to look at is the user flow. So we've got the site organized. We see what that looks like, but how does someone get through it to do the actions that we need them to? And so user flow is based on the solid blocks are like the start and the end. Well, then there's the experience pages or the information that they're presented with. That's in the rectangles there, the white rectangles. A diamond is typically shown as a decision needs to be made, and it means that one choice will go one way and another will go another. So if we're trying to take someone through this experience to, select a payment with their credit card, then what's that look like? Or do they run into trouble along the way of logging in and getting their password validated before they can actually go through the process that we need them to. So we're trying to think about what's the optimal path, and then what are the other variations that people will go through, so we can be very clear as we're taking prompts into mind and guiding them through that experience. We don't want to necessarily bias their path. We want to give prompts that help them to make a choice and then go there and then see if that really got them what they thought it should. And those are great questions to follow up after you've asked them. For example, if you see that button that says view account details, and what would you expect to get when you click that? And they can give you the answer, and then you can say, go ahead and click it. And they take that action, and then you immediately ask, is the result of that what you expected? You're getting them to talk out loud about that experience for you. And yes, some of those actions may be very basic and already ironed out. There's really no trouble, but you still got to go through some of those to get to the real area that you're studying. And again, you don't want to bias their answers, so you have to be very good about the questions that you're asking there. So it's good to know the user flow. What are we trying to get them to do? And typically a user test will have about 3-4 actions, key actions that we can test for, and then call it good. You don't want to overdo your time with the user. And what is the user, right? Because you can grab random people, but that's still not going to help you. So getting the right user persona figured out, it's the same process that we've been through with kind of, messaging campaigns and trying to target the right users, figuring out what's the walk of life and what's the challenge that they're faced with that we're going to try to solve for, and show them that they have available options. And so when you have a user persona figured out, then you start to think about, all right, let's say that I have someone willing to take my test, my user experience with me. How can I make sure they really are the person that we want? And so subsequent questions that are at the beginning of the test or in a qualification step before you get them into the test helps you make sure you really got someone that fits that user persona. Or if not, how do they vary a little bit, but they're still within the range that you want? And so asking questions like, what's your household income? What's your gender? May or may not be those questions that you need, but you can see that now we get into 2.1.4 in the green, where have you purchased groceries before? If so, how? And then, or online, excuse me, purchased groceries online before. So now you might be delineating that, well, I've never done that. No. Okay, well, thanks, and if we're qualifying them before we get into the test, they get weeded out, because we really want someone who's had online grocery shopping experience or something. So anyway, you can see how that kind of goes, and we can build some questions that help us to get that right collection of people. Now, from that initial state of figuring out who the people are to what are the questions I'm going to really ask them as we go through the test, now you're taking a look at an example of a real user experience study that was done with playnetwork.com. And these are the real questions and real answers that were given by some of those users to those questions, right? We're trying to get some impressions and get them to speak out loud about what they're looking at. And so I've highlighted in red outlines some of the interesting points that I called, that caught my eye, where someone's calling out that the font is hard to read, with those images, although it has a creative feel. I like the look, right? But there's still a dilemma that they identified in that case. Or as they're getting into 2.4, what's your impression of Play Network just from looking at the site? And we haven't got into the study yet, but we're just getting their impressions first, because that's just help. It helps kind of open their experience, how they articulate what they're going through here. And in this case, not sure what to do, but the site is nice. To a little bit more informative stuff, like in 3.3, when you see the services tab, what kind of information would you expect? And there should be more specifics about this particular thing. So they're actually voicing out loud, now that they're familiar, what they really think they're going to get before they click there. Or 3.3.22, go ahead and click it. Is this what you expected? On that other creative strategy button, and this person says it turns me off a little bit, and it goes on. There's more to that answer, etc. So we're getting them to voice what they're going through. And then I wanted to show you this too, because down as we get into the user flow and actually trying to accomplish tasks, we give them a task. So you can see the prompt there in 6. Say you want to determine what product or service options Play Network offers. what would you do to find that answer? And you just let it go, right? You let them do that. And you can see the variation. Someone just took 3 seconds to get an answer to that and was able to speak to that. Another person took them 2 minutes hunting around the site, and you're recording that whole experience. Then you ask the questions, well, what are your impressions from what you found? And the person with 2 minutes, it's super overloaded. It's not concise. It's confusing and redundant. I went in circles, followed by questions like, I want you to rate your experience now with this. So on a scale of 1 to 5, from very difficult to very easy, how easy would you say finding an example of work is? And of course, the person's going to say 1, it took them 2 minutes, versus 4, it took them 3 seconds, right? And you can sort of now get some read and actually graph those answers from their read on a scale of 1 to 5 questions. How's their overall experience with that? Okay, well, that's a lot. I just wanted to give you a view into some of the questions that are part of a usability test. There's many more, of course, but you can hopefully see as you're taking someone through the path of a key action, what's their experience along the way, and how can you measure some of those things. Wireframing. So I mentioned that this is part of the package that I have students do too, because I think it really helps them to get familiar with part of the usual work of this discipline in the professional world. And it's from design from scratch to figure out what's our website going to look like. You start with a low fidelity kind of look before you actually go source the images, before you go source the content, before you figure out exactly what those subtitles should read like, and should we include an interactive piece in there? What would that look like? So you can do this in a very efficient way. It also helps from our usability perspective, because we don't have to then be so specific on everything, but we can at least represent the experience in enough terms that helps us as comms practitioners to know what to do with it. And by the way, you could actually, even if you're just prototyping a site, you can show this to users and have them kind of point with their finger of things that they would think they would get if they click on that video player, if they click on the feature number 1 or whatever. That's actually another way to do a test before you even build a site. But I don't have my students do that, because they need actual content to work from. When it comes to the students, though, what we are aiming for them to do as they get their foot in this water, they put their foot in the water, is just understand and how to evaluate some digital interface functionality in good technical terms, as part of the industry vernacular, and understanding what the business purposes of these interfaces are, so that we drive towards those purposes and not just design something pretty. We're thinking about the end user's needs in mind, and then we conduct and evaluate these with real users, so they have that kind of firsthand experience, and they know what it's really like to assess someone's experience with that. And I'll show you one example, or two examples actually. This is one of my students in the last semester that I taught the course. Did a test on this site. This is Softwater Specialist that's based in Tri-Cities, Washington. Matt Maney is the owner, and with his permission, he knew I was going to give this, and so I don't know. He said he might be joining the call too, just to see what we talk about. But he was okay with me sharing this information from their usability test. They're a business that's very competitive in an area that has a lot of hard water as part of ground source water, but they put a lot of money towards their marketing of it so that they can be positioned really well. And so his mindfulness of this study was actually right on point. It was nice that he really wanted to see this result. Some of the findings that the student had from that experience with users, and they did really test users of the area, was that the site itself is designed pretty well, easy to use, organized, seems to provide good services as an organization. They portray themselves as very reliable, and I believe, as you might have seen down in the bottom corner, the ability to show user reviews also helped, I think, convey that reliable feeling. And then yet there were some difficulties finding some solutions that were starting to be identified as part of the study too. And so their recommendation was to decrease some of the header sections and provide a simple look to that. And then here's some of the nice things that you get to bring as a result is actual quotes of the people saying it from their own perspective. So what I like about this is you might have in your organization someone who thinks one thing and another who thinks another thing, and the designer who thinks another thing. Well, this is why we design it this way. And I'm really married to that, right? You'll have all these opinions about things, but when you get to use the quotes of people going through the experience, there's no there's no rebuttal. It almost kind of like quells the argument. It's like, well, just look at what they went through and how do we solve for that, right? In this case, there was a lot of good comments here, so um, that's nice. But we typically like to see and pull out as a result to report back where are the troubles. And here's another example that I would show because it does indicate some feedback and quotes from the users. This is from Friends of Hospice. That's a Pullman, Moscow area, Moscow, Idaho, Pullman, Washington based hospice care. And Friends of Hospice has their website. Students did the work on that. And you can see that in their recommendations, they've provided an actual wireframe design. So they took enough time for the requirements of my project for them. But you can see on the right side, they're introducing a whole right rail of information instead of having it all the way to the bottom of the website. They're making suggestions about what the labeling could be like to help enhance what users were stumbling over. That Friends of Hospice box that is featured right in the middle of their design was another enhancement that they were introducing. So there you go. You can kind of get an idea. And granted, this is very basic of a test, and so the details are only so far as they can go with the time that they've got. But I like the examples that they've provided. Okay. And that's so that's a look at it. Remember your checklist is you've got to get things in order first for it to work really well. You got to have all the answers figured out how you're going to record and bring in those users, and then you're building the products and then fulfilling that complete view when you're done, so that you already know what the user flow is going to be like that you're testing for. You've got a design in mind that they're testing through. What's that wireframe look like, followed by perhaps an enhanced wireframe as a result of the findings. And then how can you package that up with good, executive summary and strategic messaging that shows, based on the results, your findings, where do you go from here? I like it because this is an iterative thing. You're not done with one test. You really could put a discipline in that every year or two or something, you purposefully look at another portion of your website, whatever your timing is based on resources. But then as you learn from that, you go back into the design again and you make it iterative. You implement a few things and you test again based on that, right? You see if it really made the difference that you thought it should. So that's part of the long look at how to make sure this is part of your practice. And there are full-on disciplines and professionals out there, organizations that hire lots of UX experts and designers and testers just for this very purpose. Okay, that's what I've got for you today, but I would love to hear any questions that you've got that maybe I missed, or if someone has had experience with that, any input that you've got as well along that would help everyone else.
Hey Ryan, you're pretty good at monitoring the chat there. Thanks for taking part of my easing part of my role. There is one in the chat there from Jessica. I don't know if you saw it, where she said the edit/save example. Isn't the save button the most important though?
Okay,
That is one we need them to push.
I think I know what's being referred to. I believe it is, and it was principle number 4, this guy of the heuristics, right? The consistency and standards. So yes, saving is good. That is certainly true. What the point of this, and I covered up some of the screens. You can't see the entire experience of that window, but if you can follow the train of thought from edit and delete, save or cancel, that it's different. And it could be that they're introducing a new line of information, but the point that was being called out is you just broke form and format here from edit and delete to now save or cancel. And perhaps there's a better way to introduce a new item before it shows up on that list of consistent treatment, right? So it could be that that works for most people once they're familiar with it, but intuitively, this is being pointed out as it's just not standard, it's not consistent. You run the risk of someone struggling and just not getting it intuitively through, even though they're entering in new information.
And she also mentions that Miro, M-I-R-O, is a
Yeah,
good free one.
yeah, that's good to know. There are so many new tools over the last 2 years, and I believe AI and businesses that are employing those techniques. I mean, I showed you a few examples if I can go back to them. Um, I'm really impressed with some of the latest technology. It's like we've made some leaps over the last few years. It really is. So it's great. I still like in my course to try to set the basis for everybody so they understand really what this exchange is like with the user, how to get the right user, document the answers and stuff. And then should you have funding to employ some of these services, that's great. Then you're getting, like icing on the cake. You get all this stuff kind of served up to you, but you know what's really being served up and how to optimize for that.
Awesome. Hey, Andrea has a question in the chat. What do you think is the most important thing that people forget when thinking about how to ensure usability?
Um, I've noticed that some people try to take a shortcut on getting the right users, and maybe that's due to the crunch of trying to do this web project in my course in a limited amount of time. But by and large, people underestimate what it's really going to take to solicit and get their agreement to participate with you. Typically, what you're asking for is about 30 minutes of their time, and it's a freebie usually, unless your organization says, and we'll give you a $25 gift card for your time, thank you, or something like that. That is standard, but obviously the students don't have that at their disposal. And typically nonprofit organizations that we're working with on these projects don't have that at their disposal. So you're trying to get someone that is as close as possible to really the right user. And those questions that I kind of showed you about qualifying that you got the right user, they're really important. And maybe if you can't get the right users to buy in on that, you need to expand your search a little bit more. There are ways to do some of that, but yeah, I think just shortchanging some of it once you realize data in, data out. If I get the right person, then I'm going to get good results.
Cool. Thank you. Hey, Janet would like you to comment regarding responsive website designs. Specifically, how do you make them readable on both computer screens and smartphones?
Good. Thanks for that question. I actually had that in mind when I was showing some of the screens, but didn't speak to it. But you are right. Here's the screen. So that image that you're seeing there shows, bigger is better as a website, as displayed on a laptop, desktop, on a tablet, and on a phone. Responsive design is important for sure because that saves you a lot of struggle. You're and most systems nowadays, as you look into content management systems, web systems, have responsive design in their core. If you're not sure, you should take a look. And one way to do that, just bring up on your browser the website you're looking for, and then snap it out of the full screen view, so it's more of a shorter window, and then just squish the sides. See if it's maneuvering the content in any way to a tablet view, and squish it all the way as far as it can go, so that you get an idea of if someone's on a phone and they're scrolling, what does that look like? And did those components shift like they should? Did they overlay or did they separate? And you'll get an idea if your site is responsive or not. But like I said, most sites already are, and yet some things may not be as well performing as others. In fact, the PNL website that I look at and put content on, there are a few things I know we can fix better, we can do better with. I did show you an example where tables come into play in some of the wireframes. That is a good thing to keep in mind because there's the example right there on the screen. That may not operate so well when someone's on a phone. And by and large, we're used to scrolling with our thumbs. And so you come to a piece of content, you might think that's all there is without touching the other tabs, or maybe they're not even as visible in the portrait view of a phone versus a landscape view or what have you. So yeah, by and large, responsive is definitely the standard. We need to make sure we're doing that, and it helps with a lot of small issues with usability to begin with.
Cool. I think I may have what maybe the last question for you. And if anyone out there has a question that we inadvertently missed, please go crazy on chat and let us know. We'll get it in there. But earlier, Ryan, you mentioned human behaviors that are unique to an individual's business, customer base. Might be a limiting factor with AI. In your experience, can those human behaviors through description or characterization be effectively added to the AI calculation process and accounted for?
That's a great question because most websites are going to have more than one audience in mind, and so you have to figure out who you're optimizing for primarily, and then you're going to also consider those others. From an AI perspective, I think you certainly can run the content through and get analysis of those different audiences in mind. Some of it depends on the prompts, right? If you're asking the system to analyze that information or even scour other competitive information based on a certain perspective of what someone would be looking for, then you're going to get some hint at how well your site is performing for that. It's a very good question. We're on the early stage of how to deploy this, and as I mentioned, there are some gotchas too. There's some catches with using AI because it may not have enough data or understanding of the nuances of different audiences that you're striving at to really give you enough informative information there. But it's worth looking into, something to explore for sure.
Okay, cool. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I'll draw out my words a little bit in case anybody wants to throw something in there. Some good comments about the presentation that popped up.